The sun had just started to dip below the horizon, casting a burnt orange glow over the quiet roads of Maple Hollow, Virginia. It was the kind of small town you'd pass through without noticing, blink and it was gone. But on this particular evening, something happened that no one in town would ever forget. At 6:47 p.m., the security camera at Clark's Gas and Deli recorded a woman pulling up in a faded teal Buick LeSabre. She stepped out, early 60s, graying hair pulled into a soft bun, wearing a blue cardigan and a long floral skirt. Looked like someone's grandma. She didn't speak to anyone. She pumped $20 of gas, walked inside to buy a bottle of water, smiled at the clerk, and said, "Thank you kindly." And then, she vanished. No tire screech. No alarm. No trail. Just gone. Sheriff Dale Harmon reviewed the tape 10 times. He rubbed his temples as if it might help. "People don't just disappear," he muttered. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. Not just with the footage. With her. That woman wasn't passing through. She looked like someone running out of time, or running from something. And in Maple Hollow, where secrets run deeper than the wells, people started whispering. Who was she? And where did she go? It didn't take long for word to spread. By morning, the whole town was buzzing. The image from the gas station's security cam, grainy but clear enough, was pinned behind the counter at every local diner and taped to the community bulletin board outside the post office. Sheriff Harmon got the first break around 11 a.m., when old Bill Jenkins, a Vietnam vet who ran the bait shop by the river, walked into the sheriff's office carrying a worn photograph. "Dale," he said, voice low and eyes shadowed. "I know her. Her name's Margaret. Margaret Keller." Harmon frowned. The name tugged at something distant in his memory. Bill set the photo on the desk. "She used to live here. Back in the 70s. Left town after her boy died." That hit the sheriff like a punch to the ribs. He suddenly remembered, a little boy named Teddy, drowned in Pine Creek in 74. The town had mourned, but Margaret disappeared soon after the funeral. Some said she couldn't take the grief. Others whispered darker things, that she'd walked into the woods and never came out. But here she was, nearly 50 years later, at a gas station off Route 29. "Why would she come back now?" Harmon asked aloud. Bill just shook his head. "Maybe she's got unfinished business. Or maybe she's looking for something she lost." Sheriff Harmon drove out to the edge of town where the old Keller place sat like a forgotten monument. The house had long since surrendered to time, shutters crooked, paint peeling, roof sagging under the weight of years. But as he stepped out of his cruiser, something in the air felt recent. Like someone had just been there. He walked the overgrown path to the porch. The screen door creaked like a groan from the past. Inside, dust covered everything, except for a single rocking chair, swaying gently as if someone had just stood up. On the floor sat a small, cracked photo frame. He picked it up and brushed away the dust. It was Margaret, young and smiling, holding a blonde boy with dimples and bright eyes. Teddy. Harmon felt a lump in his throat. He remembered that boy. Remembered fishing contests by the creek and paper airplanes in Sunday school. He set the photo down and scanned the room. Someone had been here, maybe even last night. A teacup sat on the kitchen counter, damp and warm. But no sign of Margaret. He stepped outside and called dispatch. "Put out an alert," he said. "Margaret Keller, 63. Last seen at Clark's Gas. Might be staying at her old home." There was a long pause on the other end. Then the operator replied, "Sheriff, that house doesn't have power. Or water. It's been condemned for years." That night, as dusk settled over Maple Hollow like a soft wool blanket, lights flickered in the windows of Betty Lou's diner, the only place in town still open past 7. The regulars sat in their usual booths, sipping weak coffee and talking about the same stories they'd swapped for years. But when the bell above the door chimed, the conversations froze. In walked a woman in a faded cardigan and a long floral skirt. Betty Lou's heart skipped. She hadn't seen that face in almost 50 years, but something deep in her bones knew. "Margaret?" she said, her voice trembling. Margaret smiled faintly. "Hi, Betty." The place went silent. You could hear the refrigerator hum. Betty stepped around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "Lord, I thought you were..." She caught herself. "Gone." Margaret nodded. "I was. But I needed to come back." She took a seat at the far booth, The same one she used to sit in with little Teddy, always sharing a strawberry milkshake and grilled cheese. Betty brought over coffee without asking. "You staying long?" Margaret looked out the window. Her eyes were heavy with years of grief and something else. Hope, maybe. "Just long enough to do what I should have done a long time ago." No one dared ask what that meant. But the weight of her words hung in the air like the scent of rain before a storm. The next morning, Sheriff Harmon parked his cruiser beside Pine Creek, the same creek where Teddy Keller drowned in the summer of '74. Time hadn't changed it much. The water still babbled over smooth stones, the trees still leaned in like gossiping old men, and the rope swing, though frayed, still hung from the same oak. But something was different. Near the water's edge, he saw a small figure, a boy, maybe 8 or 9, tossing pebbles into the current. Blonde hair. Barefoot. Wearing overalls. Harmon blinked. He hadn't seen a kid out here in years. He stepped closer. "Hey there, son. Where's your folks?" The boy didn't turn around. Just kept throwing pebbles. "I'm waiting for my mama." The sheriff's chest tightened. "What's your name?" Still no eye contact. "Teddy." Harmon's breath caught. His fingers twitched at his belt, suddenly unsure what was real. Before he could say another word, a voice behind him called out. "Dale?" He turned. Margaret stood on the trail, cardigan buttoned tight against the morning chill. Her eyes locked on the boy by the creek, wide, trembling, like a wound being reopened. But when the sheriff turned back to look at the boy, he was gone. Just ripples where he'd been. Margaret stepped beside him, tears already rolling down her cheeks. "I see him too," she whispered. "Every time I come here." They sat together on an old log near the water, the sound of the creek weaving softly through the silence between them. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached down and touched the muddy earth. "It happened right there," she said, voice cracking. "He slipped on that rock. I was only a few steps away. He called out, and then he was gone." Sheriff Harmon removed his hat and bowed his head. "I was young," she said, "and stubborn. Thought I could raise him alone, thought I could outrun grief. But when he died, something in me broke. I blamed myself. And when the town started whispering that it was neglect, I believed them." Dale looked over. "No one ever blamed you, Margaret. We were just heartbroken. All of us." She shook her head slowly. "Grief makes you deaf. I couldn't hear the kindness, only the guilt." The creek babbled on like a lullaby for ghosts. "I left that night," she said. "Packed what little I had and drove. Didn't stop until the tank was empty somewhere in Tennessee. Changed my name. Started over. But I never stopped seeing him. At night. In the mirror. At the edge of water." Dale swallowed hard. "So why come back now?" Margaret's eyes lifted toward the trees. "Because I'm tired of running from my past. And I think, maybe he's tired of waiting." Later that afternoon, Margaret returned to the Keller house. She climbed the creaking stairs to the attic, a place she hadn't entered since the week after Teddy's funeral. The air was thick with dust and memories. In the far corner sat a weathered cedar chest. She knelt beside it, her knees cracking from age and time, and opened the lid. Inside were Teddy's drawings, dinosaurs with misshapen legs, a birthday card with a shaky, "Love you, Mommy," and a shoebox full of envelopes, yellowed and worn at the edges. Each envelope was addressed in her handwriting. To Teddy. Dozens of them. She had written one every year on his birthday. Sometimes on Christmas. Sometimes when she felt like she was falling apart. She never mailed them, of course. Just folded her grief into words and hoped that somehow, he would know. She picked up the most recent one, dated 3 weeks ago, and opened it. "Dear Teddy, I don't know if you'd be proud of me. I don't even know if I deserve your forgiveness. But I'm coming home now. I want to feel the wind in the trees where you laughed. I want to sit by the creek and tell you I'm sorry. And maybe, just maybe, I'll find peace." Her fingers trembled as she read, tears soaking the page. For the first time in decades, she felt something stir inside her chest. Something like hope. Word of Margaret's return spread faster than wildfire. In Maple Hollow, people didn't forget, especially not the ones who'd stayed behind. That night, the diner was unusually full for a Tuesday. Locals came in for pie, but stayed for whispers. At the counter, Henry Porter stirred his coffee 3 times before finally saying, "I saw her today. At the cemetery. Just sitting there, talking to Teddy Stone like he was right beside her." Betty Lou shook her head slowly. "Maybe he was." No one laughed. Not because they believed in ghosts, but because they believed in grief. Most of them had lost someone. A child. A parent. A brother in Vietnam. They knew the ache that never left, only changed shape. "I remember when she used to sing in the church choir," Mabel said softly. "Had a voice like morning dew. After Teddy passed, it was like her song went with him." "Some folks break," Henry murmured. "Some run. Some carry the weight till their last breath." Maybe Margaret just decided she didn't want to die carrying it anymore. Betty looked out the window, where the porch light caught the edge of a shadow. A woman walking slowly down Main Street, cardigan wrapped tight, eyes full of years. A ghost, yes, but one still breathing. The next day, Margaret knocked on the door of a small white house with a flag hanging by the porch. Bill Jenkins answered, slower now, cane in hand, his military medals gathering dust on the shelf behind him. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Well, I'll be Margaret Keller. I thought I'd seen a ghost." She smiled gently. "Sometimes I feel like one." He stepped aside. "Come on in. You want tea?" She nodded, and they sat in silence while the kettle warmed. Finally, Margaret spoke. "Bill, I came to ask you something. About the day Teddy died." Bill looked up sharply. "You don't remember?" "I do. But I've always wondered, was there more to it? Something no one told me?" Bill let out a slow breath and leaned back. "Margaret, there's something I should have told you years ago. I was fishing down by the creek that day. I saw Teddy fall in. I dropped my pole and ran, but I slipped on the bank. Hit my head on a root. When I came to, he was gone." Her eyes welled. "Why didn't you say something?" "I was ashamed. I was trained to save men in war, but I couldn't save a little boy in my own backyard. I carried that guilt every day." Margaret reached across the table, her hand shaking, and laid it on his. "We were both broken by that day. Maybe it's time we stop punishing ourselves." In that quiet moment, 2 old souls sat in the ruins of their shared sorrow, and forgave each other without saying another word. That evening, Sheriff Harmon found an envelope slipped under his office door. The handwriting was unmistakable, neat yet trembling. Inside was a letter from Margaret. "Dear Dale, thank you for seeing me, really seeing me, not just as the woman who vanished, but as someone who's carried too much for too long. I'm not asking for forgiveness, only understanding. I've lived with the silence of that summer day since I was a young woman, lost in a world that moved on without me. But you reminded me that even in grief, there's room for grace. I'm going to stay here a while longer, to make peace, to reconnect, to maybe find a second chance. And if you see Teddy by the creek, tell him I'm coming home. With gratitude, Margaret Keller." Sheriff Harmon folded the letter carefully and looked out the window toward the fading light. The past was heavy, but maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to rewrite the ending. Word spread that Margaret was settling back into Maple Hollow, and the community responded in its quiet, heartfelt way. One chilly Saturday morning, the town gathered at the old community center for a potluck, a tradition as old as the town itself. Margaret stood by the window, watching familiar faces shuffle in. Folks she hadn't seen in decades. Neighbors who remembered her laughter, her struggles, and the boy who'd taken her heart with him. Henry Porter ambled over, holding 2 paper plates piled high. "You're looking well, Margaret," he said gruffly, but there was warmth in his eyes. She smiled softly. "I'm learning to be." Betty Lou brought a slice of apple pie. "This is for you, to welcome you home." Margaret took it gratefully. "Thank you. It means more than you know." As the afternoon faded into evening, stories were shared. Of loss, of resilience, of the unbreakable ties that bind small towns together. Margaret felt a stirring in her soul, a fragile thread weaving her back into the tapestry of Maple Hollow. Maybe this was the second chance she'd been seeking all along. Late that night, as the wind whispered through the maple trees, Margaret sat by the window, a mug of chamomile tea warming her hands. The house felt different, not quite empty anymore. Like it was breathing with memories and new beginnings. The phone rang, sharp and unexpected. She hesitated, then answered. "Margaret?" The voice was hesitant, yet familiar. "It's Linda, your sister." Margaret's breath caught. She hadn't spoken to Linda in over 30 years. "I heard you were back," Linda said quietly. I'm sorry for everything. For the silence. For the years lost. Can we meet? Please." Tears welled up, blurring the dim lamplight. "Yes," Margaret whispered. "I'd like that." For decades, bitterness had been a wall between them, built from misunderstandings and pain. But maybe now, time had softened the mortar enough to start breaking it down. That night, as she hung up the phone, Margaret felt something she hadn't in years: hope that family, no matter how broken, could find its way back. The next afternoon, Margaret and Linda met at the Maple Hollow Cafe, a cozy place with chipped paint and a jukebox that still played old country tunes. They sat across from each other, unsure how to bridge the years of silence. Linda reached out, her hands shaking. "I never stopped thinking about you, Maggie. After Teddy, everything just fell apart." Margaret's eyes softened. "I know. I felt abandoned. But maybe we were both just lost." They shared memories, both sweet and bitter, of growing up in a town that wasn't always kind. They spoke of dreams deferred, and of love that hadn't died, only been buried beneath the weight of years. When Linda pulled out a faded scrapbook, Margaret smiled through tears. "Look at that, you kept all this. We were a family once," Linda said. "Maybe we still can be." And for the first time in decades, two sisters found the fragile courage to heal, one conversation, one tear, one hug at a time. In the days that followed, Margaret spent time with Bill Jenkins, sharing quiet moments on his porch. They talked about the war, not the battles overseas, but the battles inside. How a man can come home from Vietnam carrying scars no one sees. Bill confessed. "Most folks don't talk about what happens after the war. How it changes you. How it stays with you." Margaret nodded. "I think grief is a kind of war, too. You don't get medals for surviving it." Bill smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But those who carry it, they deserve to be seen." Together, they made a plan to start a small support group for veterans and others in town who were quietly struggling. A place where stories could be shared without judgment, where healing might begin. It was a new chapter for Maple Hollow, one born from kindness, sacrifice, and the courage to face pain head-on. One afternoon, Margaret received an unexpected package at her doorstep. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its edges worn, pages yellowed with age. There was no note, just her name written in elegant script on the cover. Curious, she opened it and found letters and photographs she had long forgotten, moments frozen in time from her youth, her marriage, and most heartbreakingly, from the years she had spent raising Teddy. One letter stood out, written by her late husband, Jim. "Margaret, if you ever feel lost or alone, remember that love is the thread that holds us all together. Even when we can't see it, it's there, pulling us home." Tears blurred her vision. The pain of the past was still there, but beneath it lay a quiet strength, the legacy of love and sacrifice she had almost forgotten. That night, she sat by the window, journal in hand, feeling a gentle peace settle in her heart. Maybe some gifts come late, but just in time. The first meeting of the Maple Hollow Healing Circle was small, just a handful of veterans, widows, and townsfolk, gathered in the warmth of the community center. But something powerful stirred in that room. Margaret spoke softly, sharing her story, the loss of Teddy, the years of running, and the courage it took to come home. One by one, others spoke, their voices cracking under years of silence. A Vietnam veteran shared how he struggled to ask for help. A widow spoke of loneliness after her husband's passing. A young man admitted he felt invisible in a town that seemed frozen in time. The circle became a sanctuary, a place where scars were acknowledged, kindness was offered freely, and healing began. Margaret looked around the room, her heart full. She knew this was more than a second chance for her. It was a second chance for all of them. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled in the breeze, a sleek black car pulled into town. From the passenger seat stepped a man in his late 60s, sharp suit, kind eyes, and an air of purpose. He walked into Betty Lou's diner, where Margaret was sipping coffee with Linda. "Excuse me," he said, voice warm but formal. "Are you Margaret Keller?" She nodded, heart pounding. "I'm David," he said, extending a hand. "Teddy's son." The room went silent. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. David continued, "I didn't know about you until recently. My mother passed away last year, and I found some letters. They mentioned you. I've come to meet the grandmother I never knew." Tears spilled down Margaret's cheeks as she reached out to hold his hand. In that moment, generations collided, broken paths converging toward healing, forgiveness, and love. The days that followed were filled with stories, some joyful, some painful, all necessary. David shared tales of growing up without a grandmother's love, the questions he'd carried all his life, and the family secrets that had kept him in the dark. Margaret, in turn, spoke of her youth, the bitter loss of Teddy, and the years she spent trying to outrun a grief that seemed endless. One evening, by the fireplace in the old Keller house, they sat together, sharing photographs and memories. David traced the lines of a faded picture of Teddy, his fingers trembling. "I always wondered what kind of person he'd be," David said softly. Margaret smiled, voice thick with emotion. "He was brave. He was kind. And he was loved, more than words can say." As the firelight danced on the walls, two souls, separated by time but united by love, found a new beginning. But healing in Maple Hollow wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about facing hard truths. Sheriff Harmon, with Margaret and David by his side, reopened the case surrounding Teddy's death. Old files were dusted off. Witnesses, long silent, found new courage to speak. It became clear that negligence and fear had clouded the town's judgment back then. A small memorial was planned at Pine Creek, not just for Teddy, but for all the forgotten children and families who carried invisible wounds. At the dedication, Margaret stood steady, holding David's hand. The creek sang beneath the sunlight, a reminder that justice could come quietly, like water shaping stone. "This isn't just Teddy's story," Margaret said softly to the gathered crowd. "It's ours. A chance to remember, to heal, and to never forget the power of kindness and truth." Tears fell freely, but so did hope. Years had passed since that summer day at the gas station, the day Margaret disappeared, and the town thought they'd lost her forever. But she had never truly left. She was just learning how to come back. Sitting on the porch of the old Keller house, Margaret watched the sunset paint the sky with shades of gold and rose. David was inside, helping Linda prepare dinner, laughter spilling through the open windows. The creek whispered nearby, steady, patient, and true. Margaret's heart was full, not because the past was erased, but because she had embraced it. The pain, the love, the loss, all woven together like threads in a tapestry. She had found second chances in the kindness of strangers, the forgiveness of old friends, and the reconnection with family. Most of all, she had found peace, a quiet grace that comes not from forgetting, but from remembering with love. As the stars blinked awake in the twilight, Margaret whispered into the breeze, "I'm home." And for the first time in a lifetime, she truly was.